Hey, this is Brett, and you're watching Brett and Some Books. And today we are continuing reading The Mysteries of History, Unraveling the Truth from the Myths of Our Past. This is written by Graeme, and this chapter is called Suicide by Proxy, The Death of General Gordon. By all accounts, Charles Gordon was a bit of an oddball. He was a Christian fundamentalist whose faith sat in stern condemnation of his own homosexuality, frequently writing and opining that he wished he had been born a eunuch. This internal strife likely laid at the core of his well-acknowledged death wish. While still aged 22 in 1855, he was detailed to the war against Russia being fought on the Crimean Peninsula, and so wrote to his sister Augusta that he was off to Balaclava, hoping, without having a hand in it, to be killed. End quote. After rising meteorically through the ranks, Gordon would later be lionized by the British public for his suppression of the Taiping Rebellion, 1850 to 1864, a civil war which tore through China as the nationalistic Taipings, their names translated rather ironically as Great Peace, sought to bring down the ruling Manchu dynasty and replace it with what they called the Heavenly Kingdom. Hailed at home as Chinese Gordon, he was not, understandably, held in such high regard in China, where he is still depicted as little more than an imperialist bully boy. Returning from China, Gordon became more morose and something of a recluse, with some suspicious of his motives for devoting so much of his time and money to running schools for homeless boys plucked from the London slums. Gordon's self-imposed hermitage, however, was not destined to endure. Come 1883, Muhammad Ahmed, the self-proclaimed Mahdi, a sort of Islamic messiah, had brought the Sudan to the brink of internecine conflict, and the British public began calling for Chinese Gordon to sort it all out. By January 1884, the Gladstone government had given in to this public demand and dispatched Gordon to Africa with strict orders to organize the evacuation of Khartoum, but not to tarry a moment longer than was absolutely necessary. But the thing Gladstone feared most came to pass, with Gordon becoming entrenched and unable to leave the city. Gladstone was unaware that Gordon had already resolved that he would never leave Khartoum. He had decided that the city would serve as the venue for his much desired martyrdom. It has been suggested that Gordon, morose and introspective from his formative years, was afflicted by Asperger's syndrome. He was most certainly prone to protracted bouts of depressive self-examination, during which he read nothing but the Bible. Sir Evelyn Baring, the British Consul General of Egypt, reported back to Westminster that Gordon seemed to take his instructions directly from the prophets of Old Testament. He would be unlikely in the extreme to follow the dictates of any mortal. It seems Baring was right. As Gordon approached Khartoum, he became increasingly messianic, proclaiming that he would, quote, cast down the Mahdi, end quote, and his, quote, rebel of feeble stinking dervishes, end quote, and sent telegrams to the city pronouncing, quote, be not afraid, ye are men, not women, I, Gordon, am coming, end quote. And then, to make sure his own fate was sealed, having crossed the Berber in northern Sudan with local tribal leaders, he revealed to them the details of his secret orders to evacuate all British personnel from Khartoum, as the Egyptians, who already had troops on Sudanese soil, had announced their impending withdrawal in the face of the Mahdi's escalating activity. In view of the fact that Gordon had already expressed the opinion that, quote, the moment it is known that we have given up the game, every man will go over to the Mahdi, end quote, This move cannot be seen in any other light than the form of suicide. Once ensconced in the city, Gordon made public his intention to hold out against the Mahdi before organizing the evacuation of nearly 3,000 non-combatants, which left him with about 8,000 well-armed troops, a massive stockpile of ammunition, and adequate artillery. But it was only a matter of time. The Mahdi laid siege to the city in March 1884, and by the close of that year, the population was starved close to death. Gordon wrote to his sister that he hoped it would be God's will for him to die there, as, quote, "Earth's joys grow very dim, its glories have faded," end quote. He was incessantly chain-smoking, and when not attacking his servants during his increasingly violent mood swings, he spent more time discussing God's mighty plans with the mouse that had taken up residence in his office than he did orchestrating the city's defenses. Back in the UK, the public, unaware of Gordon's state of mind, attacked Gladstone for not sending a relief column to save its hero. Eventually, after Queen Victoria herself also demanded he did so, the Prime Minister had to relent, and in August 1884 he appointed Field Marshal Sir Garnet Wolseley to lead the Nile expedition, ordering him to make ready to march on Khartoum with all possible haste. And this is where Thomas Cook travel came into the picture. Born in Derbyshire in 1808, Thomas Cook was a dedicated temperance preacher, organizing meetings and taking his congregation, as well as others, to listen to preachers at temperate rallies around the country. His first venue was a packaging deal with Midland Roadways to round-trip 500 passengers to such a rally in Loughborough on the 5th of July, 1841, at $1 a head. By 1870, he was advertising round-the-world trips, which inspired Jules Verne to pen Around the World in 80 Days, 1873. He also was running archaeological trips up the Nile in agreement with various tribal leaders and local warlords along its banks to ensure free passage. Aware of Thomas Cook's corporate expertise in the movement of large numbers of people in foreign climes and anxious to move the Nile expedition relief column as swiftly as possible, Gladstone hired Thomas Cook to handle the logistics, which must make Wolseley's army the first to have set out to war on a package holiday deal. Despite Cook's efficiency, the relief arrived just 2 days too late. Overrun by the Mahdi's forces, almost everyone in the city had been slaughtered, including Gordon, whom survivors stated to have died ranting biblical passages and firing his revolver until cut down. His head was cut off and paraded in front of the victors on a pike before being jammed into the fork of a tree for the crows to pick at. The rest of his body was hacked up and thrown down a well. Naturally, this was not something that Gladstone thought would go down well at home, so a myth was circulated that Gordon had walked out unarmed to meet his death in full uniform, with the very sight of his serene calm causing the invading horde to fall back in awe, until one coward threw a spear at him. The artist George William Joy was commissioned to run up a canvas depicting this version of events, a propaganda coup that worked so well that this is still how most remember Gordon's death. Such was the public outpouring of grief over his passing, that when a written rebuke from Queen Victoria, blaming Gladstone for Gordon's death, was made public, he was kicked out of office. And the sidebar to this one is called the Mahdi. Within 6 months of his victory over Gordon at Khartoum, the Mahdi Muhammad Ahmed was himself dead from typhus, but the war he had started continued until Lord Kitchener arrived in the Sudan to conduct a vengeful campaign of such brutality that one of his young lieutenants, Winston Churchill, wrote an open condemnation of his, quote, "kill them all," end quote, policy. The only ammunition Kitchener took to the Sudan was the later banned dum-dum round, a hollow point bullet that mushroomed on impact. He also had several of the Mahdi's son and other relatives shot out of hand. Mahdi's surviving son, Saeed al-Mahdi, born the year of his father's death, was later seen by the British as a moderate with whom they could do business. A measured and temperate man, he had meetings with King Farouk of Egypt after opening up talks in the 1950s with British Foreign Secretary Sir Anthony Eden and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. A skilled negotiator, Saeed al-Mahdi secured Sudanese independence from the Egypt-British alliance on the 1st of January 1956. And if you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe. I upload pretty frequently, and I appreciate you checking me out. And I hope you enjoyed the little history chapter.